Welcome everyone to our event today. We are lucky to have you in the room, and for those of us joining on Teams, we are lucky to have you too, even though you couldn't make it in. Today we've got a real treat for you. Today is, I know I always say that, but today is a real treat, ×3 or 4 if you want to include me. Welcome to our panel event. This is the last event in our Black History Month event. For the last 1 month, we have been speaking to some amazing women. We started off with Lucy Quest. We then had Tara Lajumoke, followed by Tanaka, our own Tanaka Chimbi. And then we had Sandra Wallace last week. And we are concluding with an amazing panel event of these amazing women here. As a reminder, this is Black History Month. It is a month where we reflect on all things past, remind people of history so they don't forget, we celebrate the present, and we inspire the future. As always, people are joining in from home or wherever they are through Teams, and there are some people in the room. We would like to hear from you. So this is not going to be one of those panels where you sit comfortably and we do all the talking. No. If you have any questions at any point in time, please do put your hand up a little bit, and someone will make sure you've got a mic. Please don't speak until you've got the mic, because we want everybody at home to hear you too. And if you're at home and you have a question, comment, or a statement, or you just want to say, I am here on here too, put it in the chat box and someone will read it to us during the Q&A. So in the room, anytime you can speak up, as a treat for being in the room. And if you're at home, you've got to wait for the Q&A, unfortunately. I don't want to talk anymore. We should get to this amazing women here. By the way, I am Maxine Ansah. I am the Global Talent Mobility Director, and also for tax. I left that out because, taxes, I wanted to sound cool before the tax game. And I will be your moderator for today. You can call me M. Did you notice that? M, Maxine, moderator? Okay. Right, we've got 3 amazing women here, and I'm super excited to be moderating you. We've got Detria. You should all know Detria, our own Detria. Williamson. She's one of our partners in our German unit. Detria has agreed to join us and has come all the way to join us and share her experiences. Grateful to have you, Detria.
Thank you.
Then we've got Abimbola Johnson. Abby, can I call you Abby?
You may, yeah.
Abby is the independent chair, or the chair of the independent, and I'm going to scrutiny for the police, for National Police Council, something like that?
Yeah, for their Raise Action Plan.
For the Raise Action Plan. It's a very good role and an important role, especially in the UK. Mm-hmm. And also, Abby happens to be an award-winning human rights barrister. Welcome.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
We've got Rashada Harris. Rashada is head technologist at AWS and top 100 ethnic minority in the UK. So quite award-winning, and we are grateful to have her presence. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Now, I gave a really brief introduction, like the tip of the iceberg on all your introductions. And I know that's because you can't wait to share yourself with us, your introduction. So I'm going to start off with Abby. Abby, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I was born in Preston in October. No, I'm joking. So by day I work as a barrister in Doughty Street Chambers, so not too far away from here. But the kind of role that I put a lot of time into at the moment is chairing the board that you've mentioned. Effectively, there are 6 of us. We work together to scrutinise all of the police forces across England and Wales in relation to a national action plan that they have developed to eradicate anti-black racism from policing. So that's been in place for a couple of years. As you can imagine, it's quite intense in terms of the work that we do there, rewarding, frustrating, interesting, arduous, detail-orientated. It kind of ticks all of the boxes. Away from work, I'm a mum, I'm a wife, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm a cousin, all sorts of things. But yeah, really happy to be here on this panel and just kind of share some insights and listen to some reflections from the fantastic women who I'm sitting alongside.
Great. Detria.
I'm Detria, and so excited to be here with Ignite and Kearney and Maxine and these incredible women. So again, thank you for having me. My background is in digital experience and innovation. Formerly, I was Chief Marketing and Chief Experience Officer for IDEO. Also was a Senior Managing Director for Accenture Interactive, now Accenture Song, looking over digital design and innovation. And my favorite title is I am a very successful single mom and have been most of my career. So look forward to sharing some of that journey if you all are interested in that, because it hasn't been easy. But I'm very excited to be here. And I'm a global specialist partner working within Ignite for Kearney and based out of DACH. So happy to be here.
Rashada.
Yes, so nice to meet you, everyone. My name is Dr. Rashada Harry. By day, I'm an enterprise technologist at Amazon Web Services, and I advise our enterprise retail customers on their cloud and digital transformation journey. In addition to that role at AWS, I'm also the UK and I leader for our inclusion ambassadors, and we seek to promote inclusive practices across inclusion, diversity and equity within our organisation. And external to AWS, I'm the co-founder and executive CEO of an initiative called Your Future, Your Ambition, which seeks to drive and inform young people from the age of 7 right up to graduate age about pursuing careers in science, technology, engineering, the arts, and maths. And I'm also a trustee on a couple of boards, including Taloa, which is a theatre company, and Engineering UK, where I'm chair of the Big Bang Kick. So nice to meet you, and I'm glad to be part of the conversation.
That's great. Oh, you must know my friend Elaine.
I do know Elaine.
Yeah.
I do. It's a small world.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, this is how we're going to do it. I'm going to start the conversation and steer the conversations, but at any point in time, if anyone has anything to chime in, and those in the room, please do. Can we start with you, Abby? Intersectionality plays such a big role in shaping our experiences. We identify through gender, race, family status, etc. Can you share how that has shaped your experiences and career, and how you've navigated some of the challenges that comes with that?
Yeah, I mean, I always find this a really interesting question because you just are intersectional. It's not really possible to describe how it shaped your experiences because it's just what you are, right? But I guess to describe me through my characteristics, obviously I'm black, I'm female, but then I'm extraordinarily privileged. So I belong to a privileged profession. I think if you say to anyone you're a barrister, generally that kind of conjures up images of you being quite intelligent, well-read, trustworthy, and so on. So your word carries a lot of weight. I'm, from a long line of lawyers. So on my side of the family, all the way through to my great-grandparents, in every generation somebody has a law degree, whether they use it or not. And then on my husband's side of the family, there's like a joke in his family that I've carried on their name in terms of the law, because none of him or his cousins had a law degree, and his mum sighed a breath of relief when I walked through the door, and she was like, oh, thank God, there's a barrister in this generation as well, because he can trace his family back to 1066, and there's like royalty and all sorts in there. So I look at my son and just think, wow, nothing should really hold you back. So I think I'm very, very privileged, and I can highlight exactly where my blackness comes from. I've got very obvious Nigerian heritage. My family back there is very middle class. They're all kind of like lawyers, politicians, and so on. But then I think that gives me quite a lot of awareness in terms of the spaces that I navigate. Like when I walk through a room, I can see people's faces change when they hear the credentials that I have. And it kind of marks that shift of, oh, here's a black woman. And they're like, oh, here's an Oxford-educated black woman. Oh, here's a barrister who is Oxford-educated and she's a black woman. And it massively, massively changes. So I've had court cases, for example, where I've sat next to counsel, and particularly the much older male, white kind of co-counsel. And, I'll say something or do something, and they'll kind of look at me and just be like, oh, wow, that was really impressive. So, I had one guy and he was like, did you read Latin at school? Because, your pronunciation of some of the legal terminology was so fantastic. And I was like, first of all, Latin's a dead language, but
Sorry.
But yeah, I did do it as GCSE. Because, I can really tell. So like you can see,
Yeah.
I think people kind of lose their boundaries because I don't necessarily fit what their stereotypical impression of people from my background is. So I would say my intersectionality is quite exposing because I have that privilege. I think it makes me see exactly how people measure different parts of my characteristics. But yeah, and in terms of the way that it's influenced me, I think it's made me hyper aware of how people can be treated in terms of characteristics that I don't share. If I speak to my black female colleagues at the bar who don't speak the way that I do or didn't go to the university that I went to, their interactions with the same people can be different, and I can pinpoint that and say that's because they think I'm one of them, and they still other this person based on this particular perception. So yeah, I mean, I think it makes things quite interesting, is what I'd say overall, and it's definitely made me more kind of sensitive to matters that I think that if I had the privilege that I had, but weren't black and female, may go over my head in certain scenarios.
Interesting.
Anything to add,
Yeah.
Rashada?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting perspective, and I think one that I also can relate to. I actually also have a law background as well, but I come from a very underrepresented background. My parents are part of the Windrush generation, and although they are actually a family of academics, I think growing up in the UK in like the 80s, I'm showing my age now, things weren't always as opportune as perhaps they are now to people from Black and Afro-Caribbean backgrounds. One of the things that I particularly agree with is the perception that people have. Yeah. When I walk through the door, similarly, I'm Black, I'm a woman, I'm also dyslexic. And you wouldn't know that unless I told you that. However, how that presents in conversation, or how when I remember early in my career when I had one of my first kind of corporate relationships with one of my clients, my name is an Arabic name and it means sunrise. And if you didn't know me or you didn't know my gender, you may presume that I'm actually a male. And that's exactly what one of my first clients ever did. So I walked into a meeting room and before I could even introduce myself, the CEO and his team were like, right, that's a tea, 2 coffees and a water, please. And there's nothing wrong with getting the tea, 2 coffees and a water, but that was not my role. And actually I was their account lead. So without even thinking about it, I said, sure, absolutely. The kitchen's down the hall. Please help yourself. And when we come back, we can resume the meeting. I'm your account manager. And it's about the perception of who they thought I was, maybe because of my age at the time. And, I like to think I've still got a bit of a baby face, but maybe not. But equally, it's about how we then show up when these things do present. And I think it was in that moment that had I not corrected that misconception about my role and who I was, that would have set the tone for the relationship. So when we are presented with these perhaps unconscious and sometimes conscious biases, it's really important that we reframe the narrative, we set the tone of the engagement, and we show up in a way that we want people to engage with us. I think that's vitally important. So just wanted to add that in.
But it's exhausting.
It is.
It's exhausting to reset with people all over and over again, because the next time you go to another account, you probably would go through the same if they don't know you, and could affect the advancement and well-being of women in the workplace. So, Detria, what challenges do you think significantly affect women, and especially one of color, in the workplace? And these days, it's not just the advancement, but also the well-being. The well-being. Yeah.
So. First, speaking of difference, all Black women aren't the same. We have very different backgrounds, although sometimes similar struggles. For example, I think workplace trauma is something that many of us suffer from. And that's not only exclusive to women of color, but I think because of some of the situations that you've shared, certainly the situations that I've experienced where, we're often undermined, and it doesn't really matter what our level is. So you're seeing all of us here in very successful roles, but at least in my experience, I've been undermined in the past. There are microaggressions that show up in meetings often. People will never sort of gift you, in my opinion, the promotion. They'll never gift you their network. Rarely will gift you the opportunity. You have to fight for it. And so therefore, I find many women, and particularly women of color, are very tired. Sometimes it feeds into this perception that women of color are angry. I wouldn't say angry, but tired, usually working on the 24th hour. Many of us carry many different roles in our communities, in churches, or whatever our spiritual background is. I myself come from a very different background where I did not grow up in a privileged scenario. I was a single Black woman, the youngest director Discovery Channel, for example, had many years ago, and that was not easy. So I would say workplace trauma is real. We carry it, we try to hide it. So that's something that I would say is something that we've all, I would imagine, have experienced at some point in our careers. We were even talking about, the first thing that usually friends of mine in the industry say is, I'm tired. Like, I haven't met anyone that said, oh, everything's been great. It's been such a perfect career, and, I just keep growing leaps and bounds, and, it usually comes with a fight and some sort of struggle. So, yeah.
I'm going to be a bit different.
Yeah.
No, not challenge it, because I think what you're saying is completely legitimate. I'm not tired when I work in that way, but I think there are very specific reasons why. So all of my girlfriends, a lot of my girlfriends who are working in employed environments, echo what you have said, and and I think it's really interesting that across generations that persists. And I think if anything, also what happens is our expectations change, but the corporate kind of systems don't catch up with expectations. So even though the corporations think that they've improved, actually they still don't meet the demands of what people want. Like, in previous generations it was about over obvious racism and over obvious discrimination, whereas now it's about it's still about that, but also the really subtle aspects, and the corporations would accept the overt, but then they are still struggling to navigate those kind of softer pieces that people need to be changed, the attitudinal, the cultural aspects of things. But as a self-employed barrister, I think I've actually managed to avoid a lot of those issues and a lot of that. And when I sit down and reflect on why that is, I think it's because I don't have to report into other people. I don't have to justify decisions around things. Like I say, as a barrister, it has that kind of professional kind of admiration almost that people have for stuff. So even when I then go into other roles, and specifically actually when I'm working outside of the bar, I don't have to prove myself in the same way that I do see others needing to do so. So I think one of the challenges really that people that organisations need to get to grips with is, how do you change your culture to respect the people who are within it at the level that they need you to provide, not at the level that corporations think that they are providing things with. And I see it in the race action plan with the feedback that I give to them. Very often I'll speak to police officers, members of senior leadership teams, and they'll tell me they've done this fantastic community engagement piece, or they've spoken to their Black staff and these are the things they're going to prioritise and work on. And I'll go and speak to the very same people that they've just had those conversations with, and they'll say, we didn't feel listened to, they didn't share information with us in advance, there's no feedback loop around these things. But yeah, it's such a pattern. And I would say that the Black women who I know who are most comfortable and happiest in their careers are the ones who have stepped off of the ladder and have created those environments for themselves in which to work. And I just wonder if there are any examples that women can provide where they have been within that organisational structure and don't feel tired.
I mean, and I think I have to add something to this, because I think it's a really good intersection. I think it depends on the organisation, because no two organisations are the same. It depends on the culture. I also think it depends on the leadership within those organisations. It depends, and not just the leadership, actually at every single level, because you can have a top-down approach where the leaders of an organisation are really clear and mandate this has to be an inclusive environment, but if your middle management are not open to that and are actually being the blockers, it makes it really difficult for those underneath that to see the influence and to see the impact. So I think as individuals we have a responsibility, and I often surmise in some of the talks that I give that leadership is a privilege, and as leaders, and certainly we say this at AWS, we're all leaders, whether you're in a management role, if you have a team or not, you're all leaders, and with that comes a responsibility that you have to be inclusive. You have to challenge yourself with not only the status quo, but where are you on that line? And you have to, I think, as an individual, certainly for myself, being in a corporate environment and had numerous roles in the corporate, I think I have to challenge myself to say, well, I have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. I have to use my voice and amplify when things I feel are not being inclusive, because in order to get to an equitable society, which I think is what we're all aiming for in our discussions, and certainly one that's amplified during Black History Month, but should be throughout the year anyway, is that without inclusion, you won't have diversity. And without diversity, you won't get the equity. So what steps are we as individuals taking to make it a more equitable place, so that people don't feel tired, so that people who are working hard are getting amplified, so that people are not being left behind, but actually it's a place where everyone can see themselves, whether they're an entrepreneur or whether they're running a business and making that right for their teams, or whether you are part of a corporate structure, leading teams, or as an individual contributor. I think it's something that we all have to take individual responsibility for, regardless of where we are in society.
Well, then how can we encourage and support women in the organization? I think we should give some examples of these. What should leaders be doing? Detria.
I'm sure we have a list, but one, and this is for our leaders too, but to be unapologetic in accelerating the growth of women and people and women of color on your team. I mean, to be unapologetic about accelerating their growth. And I find that, to your point, there's diversity, which I believe can be engineered, but inclusion and this sense of belonging and equity can't. And one of the biggest challenges is growth. And so as an ally and sponsor and advocate, and I think someone was saying this in a discussion about really anchoring yourself, right? Taking your words, sharing, but really being unapologetic in the acceleration of the growth on your team, I think is key. Also, as you were mentioning about leadership being a privilege, you know, when we're in these meetings, when we're aware or we see these microaggressions or the things that are traumatic, it's really on us to pause and to say, you know, pardon me, I think so-and-so was just speaking, can we let them finish their thought? Or to build on someone's idea, to say, so-and-so just had an excellent idea. If we don't do those things, you know, the trends don't break. So I think also modeling on an ongoing basis. So when I talk about being tired, you know, so when you come into an organization and you're the only, or you have teams where there is one of very, you know, few that are on that team, you need to model and step up and step in and lean in and advocate and voice. And that's an extra role, certainly on the corporate side, I would say.
I would agree. And I think, you know, I think this is for women generally, not just black women, but sometimes we don't always advocate for ourselves. We don't celebrate the small wins. And I think that's so vitally important. And I think as leaders, as managers, as individual contributors, it's important to celebrate your colleagues, to amplify them when they haven't got a voice, to share publicly when something's worked well, and to support when things don't, because it's not always a straight path to success, right? Sometimes things often will go wrong, but it's how we deal with those failures, and having that supportive network of people who can lift you up. And that could be, you know, through allyship. It doesn't have to be someone from your group. It could be someone actually that you recognise the potential of. I think it's vitally important that we support each other, and I think that's a testament to what you've just shared.
Yeah, I think women do that though. I think in particular women of colour and black women, in my experience, I think we do that already. And I think that's one reason why women are tired, because there's a lot of extra kind of unpaid mentoring, further work that we do. And when I look at the bar in particular, I can't think of any of my black colleagues who don't have a mentee, who don't take their time out to go to schools and talk, who don't, you know, go to the inns and do various things, who don't sit on their diversity committees. So for me, the emphasis is less on challenging individuals to speak up and call out racism or call out prejudice. My point, I think my focus is always on making everything less personality driven. I just don't think it should be dependent on the individuals who are in the room to change the feeling of the room. So for me, it's like, if you're a leader, what are you doing to change the policies? What are you doing to record keep decisions? What are you doing to ensure that the next person who comes through doesn't have to start from zero and speak to your replacement? Because are you actually making sure that you are cementing the changes that you have identified and that you've put in? Prejudice is not about bias. I think we need to move past the kind of June 2020 discussions where we started speaking about racism outside of our, and we all have these, outside of our like black girl groups and black groups where we spoke really frankly about it. And then I think that's where this language around unconscious bias and bias kind of crept in. What we were doing was we were softening the reality of racism to make it more palatable for interracial conversations that were taking place. The power and the injury that's caused by racism is the fact that those individual attitudes are justified, amplified and cemented through practices, procedures and policies that are completely inadequate. So my interest is looking at the way that those who are in leadership are changing the written policies, the cultures of their organisations. I'm a lot less bothered about you sitting down with me and saying, hey, I really thought that was such a great contribution in that meeting, I'm going to champion you next time. I'm much more interested in you saying, you know what, I keep noticing that this keeps happening, so we need to create a policy and we need to put this, and I'm going to be the face of this, and I'm going to be accountable through these structures, and we'll make sure that it's part of the job description for my replacement so that this continues. And I think that's when you see tangible and real change. So I think all those things need to happen at the same time.
But I feel like that's on the assumption that everyone's listening,
Yeah,
and everyone's on the same part of the journey, and everyone is taking this with both eyes open and both ears, and is fully appreciating the experiences of others. I think I'd be remiss to think that everyone is at the same point in that, but I also recognise the importance of educating and informing. I think, you know, if you look at the room today, we've got a really intersectional group of people listening to the conversation. I'm sure we've got loads of great questions for us later, but it's about understanding, because that might not be the lived experience of a lot of people, and therefore how do they relate to it? So sometimes we do have to take on that work to kind of sharing our experiences, not to relive the trauma, but to share how the practices and the systems that are in place are either hindering or holding people back from, irrespective of from various different groups, but actually challenging those who are not part of that lived experience to challenge the status quo, to amplify the voices, to say, actually, I've been noticing this, but I'm going to change it, and this is what I'm going to do to help move the needle forward. Because I think we've still got a long way to go, and I agree we need to move past 2020, but I do recognise that this has been a lived experience of a lot of people for a longer period of time.
But that's why I think it needs to move past saying individuals need to challenge, and it needs to move into those who do get it, creating systemic changes.
I think I agree.
So because not everybody is on the same page, and so you may get it, or a colleague may get it, and they do a lot of good work, but if they're not leaving a legacy of change, it's even more susceptible to attrition, damage, and being forgotten. So that's why I think that all those things need to happen at the same time. With less emphasis, hopefully, as we can move forward, less emphasis on expecting the people of colour to come
do the
in
work.
and
Yeah.
break it down for,
Do the work.
for everybody else.
Yeah.
Adding to the time.
Well, we've been having fun here,
Yeah.
and they've been quiet. Shall we include them?
Yeah.
Shall we include you?
Please.
Good.
Questions?
Questions from the room?
Thoughts? Do you agree?
Yeah. Or in the chat, maybe
Yeah.
there's some
I think
things in the chat.
There was a hand.
Mhm.
Okay. Was there a hand raised? Yes, there was.
Yeah, I really hope this question doesn't get me fired or something.
There's no silly questions.
Yeah.
Not at all.
So when you were telling the Arabic sunrise story, I thought it was really interesting because there was, an incident that is like undoubtedly kind of shitty. Also gave you an opportunity to not just correct the impression, but actually create more out of it than you would have had it not happened. Because, like you got to assert yourself in a very strong way that shows them that, oh, not only is she the account manager, like shit, I got that wrong, but she's got this like strength, you showed that, which is actually already another like good kind of quality on top of that. And then it got me thinking of like, because I've been in a career, I may not look, intersectional or whatever, but I've been in a career, in fashion and stuff where I was an outsider. And there was times when, like, I felt that, it was really annoying, but then other times when I'm like, oh, like, this person's kind of intimidated by me or like uncomfortable by me, that's actually a good thing, because then I can use that, like sometimes you can, most of the time I don't want it, but like, you know what I mean? So what I'm curious about is, do you ever find like, you're like, like, maybe I can make a lemonade out of this, or
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of my question.
I'm assuming it's to all of us, but I'll
Yeah,
answer
I
first.
think that story brought it up, but I'd
Yeah.
love to hear examples of that.
Yeah, and I think, I think that experience, you're right. I mean, I'm full transparency, I'm from South London. And,
That was like full transparency.
Growing up where I did, like, you had to have that resilience and you had to have that conviction to kind of stand your ground in certain situations. And I think, in that experience, in that particular moment, I heard the words come out my mouth when I said them. So it wasn't like I kind of thought, oh, how am I going to deal with this? Let me just kind of be poised. And it rolled right off my tongue. And you know what? That was the most authentic part of it, because I feel like in these situations, you can only be yourself, and you can only show up for yourself, and you can only kind of convey. You can't act and be who you're not. Well, you can, but you can only do it for so long. And I don't want to live my life, and I don't want to show up in any situation, corporate, work, outside, in any other circumstance, not being my true and authentic self. And I think when you are in situations where you are the only one, or there's a perception of who you might be and how you could show up, or people are putting labels on you, it's absolutely it's your role, and kind of you owe it to yourself to kind of say, actually, this is how I want to show up, and this is how I want people to engage with me. I feel like, those experiences, and there are many more, that's just one of them. There's been so many others that I can kind of reel off, where it's been like, did they really just say that? And you kind of catch it afterwards, and you're annoyed because you didn't say anything in the moment, and you're just like, oh, you're stuck with it. But actually, what I realized is you have to show up for yourself. You have to advocate for yourself. But imagine if I didn't have that voice. Imagine if I didn't have that resilience and that confidence. So then what would be the role of anyone else in the room then? To say, actually, hey, go and get the tea yourself. That's not her job. And so that's why I say it's an individual journey, but I recognize that resilience is part of it, and it's I feel like a bit of an elastic band. Sometimes it stretches you, comes back, and you just got to kind of go with it until everyone's kind of get on the journey. So
Yeah.
Is it possible to repeat the question for the people at home? We had a bit of issue with the mic.
Oh, okay.
Question.
The question in the room was effectively, how do you use your difference, right? Positively. I think that's the summary of it. And do we feel that sometimes gives us an edge? And I like your answer, Rashada, because we may be bold. The people that are bold win then. But there are others that do not have that voice. I often talk about my daughter, who is not, I would say, as strong as I am. I've been through it, right? So I can get a strong, thick skin. But what about those little girls who may not stand up for themselves? And there are a lot more of them than there are of people that will speak up for themselves. So, like you said, in Rashada's case, someone would have gone and got the coffee. Their confidence would have taken a little bit of a blow. They wouldn't have presented in the next session because they've been taken down a notch. So when women are constantly taken down a notch and they are leading that meeting, imagine leading a client meeting and you've already been told to get the coffee.
Or you can do both. I was also came into a role where I was the head of marketing, and the CEO of the division thought I was their temporary assistant showing up. And they told me right when I came in how they liked their tea. So I went and made the tea, and then I came back and sat down and introduced myself as the new head of marketing, which was a newly created role. And the person was so shocked and felt so sorry. And in fact, we're still friends. And this was something many, many years ago. So I think this ability to correct and to be resilient and stand in and who you are and your intelligence. It's not always so easy, but I think it is also on us to model.
I will say as well that we are still friends. We are good friends now, and he often reminds me of that initial, because it's challenging his thoughts. It caused him to take a step back and think and reflect on how he showed up and what he's done since then. So, I think try and use your voice. Let's all use your voice to speak for others.
I enjoy moments like that, because I think also it's just quite fun watching people squirm.
Like when I brought the tea, I
I just enjoy the discomfort. It's like watching 40 Towers in real time. I really enjoy it, and at court it was an advantage for me. I'd come in, and particularly because I think I look younger than I am as well, but also was at a really good set of chambers, so I was exposed to work that others wouldn't get until a bit later in their career. So very often the person who I was against or co-defending with would be more senior to me, and so on. So I'd come in and they'd sort of think, oh, she looks a bit young, she looks a bit this and that. And I was just like, no, I've read every single page of these papers. Here's my skeleton arguments. Here are my legal arguments about this. Did you highlight this? Here's a disclosure. And they're just kind of taken aback, and particularly because I'm a defence advocate, so the prosecution goes first, right? They open their case, they call their witness. You don't say anything sometimes until the second or third day when you stand up to cross-examine, and you I just loved watching them just be like, oh, she knows what she's doing. I maybe should have reread this, and it's great. I think it's like a secret weapon, isn't it? But also, I'm in an interracial relationship, and I think also for me, I think it's quite a character flaw exposure as well. I feel as though there are people who, being in an interracial relationship, my husband now has recalculated some of the boundaries that he has around friendships with certain people because of the way that they have interacted with me or my family or our son. But these are things that I would have picked up on straight away. So he's invested years in some people who are not worth it, but I would have known straight away that they weren't, because you have more direct and exposing conversations just by being in the room. And so I totally hear what you're saying. I loved that question actually, because I think it's a great way to navigate life.
I feel bad, because to me leadership is a privilege, like you said, and it's sadly, and this is not a reflection of Kearney, but just as an industry, there's a lot of poor leadership. And people that do behave in that way, it's so ignorant. I actually feel bad. I'm always willing to give a bit of real talk session to anyone that wants it, because it's just poor leadership, in my opinion, when those things happen. And the reality is there are that poor leadership exists across every company.
And it's also not without impact. I think everything that leadership does, everything that we should, by the way, we're going to take some commitments away with us today. But for me, and I'm saying mine ahead of time, is everything you do has an impact on someone else or a group of people. We shouldn't go around life thinking that nobody sees us, or what we do doesn't matter. And it can change people quite easily. You know, for people's reaction to things are also different. So one person would suffer. So it's amazing and important that we don't do it. Because the fact that others will thrive from it and use it to our advantage doesn't mean that everybody, it's a positive experience for everybody, because it can be very impactful for a large group of people. And we need to be aware of those little microaggressions, even the little jokes. It's not funny anymore. Yeah. We're gonna share our thoughts here on the importance of representation in the workplace, right? We talk about DEI. It's become the thing, and especially after 2020, it's like a pivotal year for all people in kind of racial advocacy position. But before that, it was normal, right? We saw it as normal for people to be, body on neck of someone, until a lot of people spoke up. How is it important that we advocate for DEI in the workplace? And I want everybody to give a call of action to a leader here. I know we've spoken about it, but I think that we should ask our leaders to make some commitments right here and now. Did you really want to start here? Because you're one of us.
Okay.
So a little bit more responsibility on you today.
Okay. So my call to leaders is to create a power with dynamic and not a power over, which particularly in corporations and firms is quite high. So to create this dynamic where you are empowering people and unapologetic, again, and doing that for people with difference and people of color. That's my call out and commitment, to create a power with and not a power over dynamic.
Abby?
So I think one of the things that I'm tired of hearing is the idea that recruitment of a diverse workforce is a solve in itself. Because I think that's premised on the idea that you think that those people who come from those diverse backgrounds are then going to change the organisation. So actually you're adding a level of expectation on them that not only are they going to do their day job, they're also going to transform the culture of your organisation. So I think that something that I always challenge leaders to do when I have conversations with them is, what are you doing to create a safe environment before you even start looking for people from diverse backgrounds to come into your organisations? And that's, I think, a challenge there. And it goes with what you're saying, which is flattening structures. You know, like if you are in a corporation where there are 15 levels between the CEO and the average person who works in the office, then what is the attrition of discussion and challenge that needs to be had before there's sign off on decisions? And like you say, that middle management piece that comes in where things just go to die happens so regularly. So for me, the leadership challenge is taking culture as a personal responsibility rather than expecting it to just manifest through diversity.
Can I just add on to what you're saying, because it's so good? And please don't use this as an add-on, because we feel it. You know, when we get presentations in the middle of the night and are asked to present on those, when we see our faces showing up on presentations but we don't know what the topics are, when we're brought into lunches and we're told about it the day before, it's pretty obvious that we're an add-on. So see us as real contributors and of value. That's what I would add to what you're saying about creating that safe space.
I was just going to say, what doesn't get measured does not get done.
I love that phrase, yes.
Show your data. Expose yourself, be vulnerable to where you are in the process. That is the ask. I think, you know, without looking at, I come from a very data-driven organisation, and it's really important that you look at the data, you understand the data, you understand why people are leaving your organisation, really understanding it, look at those exit interviews, fully go through every part of your process, from application to interview. Who are the people that are part of that process? What biases may they have? How do we, how do we eradicate that? How do we challenge the status quo? When someone comes into the organisation and comes into the role, how are we not only providing that safe space for our culture, but how are we making sure that we are not only mentoring them, sponsoring them, but anchoring them to be successful.
That's right.
That's the point I wanted to really amplify. I call on every leader that I engage with and speak to say, what are you going to do differently? How are you going to challenge your colleagues, your peers in other industries to also do this, to make sure there's legacy and impact from this work? And then call it out where you're successful, call out where you failed in particular, to say, well, actually, we tried this, it really didn't work. In fact, it was disastrous. Don't do this, try something else. Listen, I think sometimes organizations and people, we are fearful of failure, but sometimes that's where we learn the most. So I encourage leaders to fail fast, but fail forward, right? So that we can learn and we can amplify and leave that legacy so that the next echelon and the next experience that people have is a lot better.
Yeah.
And creating meaningful metrics.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
looking at, who are being promoted, looking at,
Work
in the case,
allocation.
exactly,
The criteria.
looking at allocation of projects, looking at, within a firm situation, it would be, billable time and how that's being put towards the women on your team, the women of color, the people of color on your team.
What you pay for.
Yeah, exactly.
As well, like what do you actually respect and honour within your company? Because are you kind of, you're benefiting from diversity projects and so on, but the people who put the time and effort into that, is that part of their promotional kind of packages, or do you as a company benefit from it and then you're still pressuring that person to do billable work on top of that? You're not viewing that as like part of an inherent role, and I think that's really important. And also collecting data honestly, like this must frustrate you, like I see it with the police a lot. They will collect data and they will present it to you and you'll be like, that is not what that data
Of course
says.
it is. Tell the truth. That's very like, if you're going to show the data, show it in full transparency, good, bad and ugly, right? Let's just be very clear about that. It's not to show the good metrics, it's to show the good, the bad and the disastrous. That's the point.
The switching, when you see the switching between
just
black to BAME, and I'm like,
doubled,
hold on.
or the metric of, we've got 100%, we've doubled the amount of people.
But you got from 1 to 2.
Come on, let's be fully transparent. But the point that was raised just now about, adding this into promotional material, I actually think it should be KPI'd into job descriptions.
It should
right?
be.
It should be part of job descriptions now that everyone has a responsibility. It's not just the people who are underrepresented should have this, everyone should, regardless of your background. And I think, there are a lot of people who have a lot of allyship and akinness to some of the social challenges that we have as black women. And actually, let's bring them on the journey. We don't have to bear this load alone. So that's what I would encourage. But the data, let's just show it for what it is, please. Not the 100% from 1 to 2. It's not going to work.
Yeah. So from 1 to 2, it shouldn't be 100%.
It should be 100%, but I want it 200 to 400. Let's start. Let's start there.
Well, are we taking notes here? I hope we are. We are busy taking notes. But now, I think we've given leaders some thoughts. All our leaders will not be sleeping tonight. They have a lot to chew on. Let's come to how we give to our communities, how we pay for it. I like to say that a lot of women have paved the way for all of us to be here. How have you each paid for it or given to the community? And if you can share some of that. So, Abby, how do you pay for it?
Oh, so I'm on the managing committee for the Black Barristers Network. So we do a lot of mentoring work. We individually on the committee sit on other committees and then bring that work together. So a number of us are on things like the Bar Council Board, Bar Standards Boards, doing kind of anti-discrimination work in other industries, and then we share that learning together to try and contribute to things that will move forward. But I think another reason, so this goes back to what you were saying before, was there was a point where I was getting tired actually with work, and that was when I was doing my criminal defence practice. I'd been caught all day every day, and I would be doing the work on trying to challenge and to change things. And actually after a point I just thought, why don't I pivot my practice so that my practice is the challenge, and that way it's not an add-on. I'm not exhausting myself through that, and that way it becomes the paid kind of section of my work, but I'm also making the difference. I feel valued by doing that. So I'd say I'm quite lucky that my work itself, I think, is paying things forward. I'm hoping that through the scrutiny work that I'm doing with the police, that I'm challenging them to, have a legacy of accepting institutional racism, changing the way that they use stop and search, being more transparent about community engagement, using force less, and so on. So,
Detria?
So I'll try to be brief here, but I have a lot to share. So one, internally, I think what I've started to do is just to show up. Like, for example, Maxine has been fantastic my 7 weeks here, and it was very important, and I also needed to fight for and show my commitment and showing up. So that's important, is to show up. Also to show up and create this open door space, which I've done for any environment that I've been at within Kearney. I've said to people, call me. On one side, if you are a white male and you want to have a bit of real talk on situations, happy to do that in a safe space. Also have had women of color, people of color contact me. So using my voice internally is something that I don't forget to do. I also sit on the board for a company called True Voice, which is about scaling in large tech companies a speak-up culture. And because I think when it's done well, then it's not just about bringing diversity, because then it's critical to driving creativity and innovation. So creating a speak-up culture through this company, True Voice, is something that I do. And also, I've had the pleasure of supporting a lot of CEOs in my role as CMO across lots of businesses. So I usually run some sort of camp a couple of times a year where I offer, particularly to women of color, workshops on brand, personal brand, because it's something that is needed to sort of secure your value and your worth in the market where you are, but also for your next role. So.
So emotional just hearing a leader like also shared. I think it's so important. It's so lovely because you don't always see role models in leadership positions who are so open and transparent. I love it. Everyone here, love it.
Rashada, I'm coming to you.
Yeah. So I've been doing this work since university, to be honest, and I've always had that kind of fighter spirit, that resilience, I'm going to say, in me. So obviously at AWS, where I am now, I'm also co-lead of the Women at AWS network, ERG, where I pose particular focus on having the uncomfortable conversations and the non-conventional ones, and that's really how I try to inform and engage with people to share things that they wouldn't ordinarily. So we have conversations such as like, what happens when you don't get that promotion? What happens when you don't get on with your manager, or and so I try to show up in ways that are off the beaten track internally. I'm also an inclusion ambassador lead for the UK, so that's where we encourage conversations with leaders, with managers, with individuals about how we can amplify a better culture, how we can support the culture moving forward, because we don't think the culture should be it and that's it, we've done it. It's something that's going to iterate and it's going to change over time, and so we have to move with that, and so we encourage that through conversations and through activities and engagements globally. And then externally, as I mentioned, I co-founded an initiative to help support young people into STEM careers. I think it's really important that young people from all backgrounds get to see a representation of themselves in industry. Because I feel that young people sometimes don't always know what they want to be when they grow up, because they don't see themselves represented in organisations or in roles. And so once a year we put on an event at the Emirates football stadium. Gooners over there. And we invite 300 industry mentors and leaders from a range of different organisations to really share what they do, their backgrounds, how they got to where they got to, just to give them that binding link between education and industry, because I want people to see themselves represented in industry, see those role models and have that conversation. And so I do that, and then I'm trustee for a number of charities as well.
So you're a South Londoner, but you're a Gooner?
Yeah, that's okay. That's all right. It works. And also, yes. Yes. We'll leave that to another conversation, but yes.
I'm a Gooner too, so it's
okay, fine.
Now, on the back on the back of that, we would go to the room. Any questions? Let's make sure that everybody's awake.
Any feedback?
And oh yes.
So we spoke a little bit, I mean, especially at the start, we spoke a bit about the whole concept of unconscious bias. And I think what I'm thinking about, at least from my own perspective, is I try to avoid getting to the point of becoming that old person that has a lot of unconscious bias, because then I almost feel it's already too late sometimes, or it takes a lot of effort on trying to overcome that. So I was just wondering if you have any advice on for people who are trying to avoid that. What is some advice to avoid for us to have a lot of unconscious bias as we go throughout life, and what are some of the things we can read up on or to avoid that, basically?
How to avoid it? Well, we are programmed to have biases, but how do we make sure that we don't use that to impact people negatively? I think that is what we have in the room.
Yeah, so it's interesting because what you shared is I would say it's sort of a provocative belief that I have about is unconscious bias just sort of like a term that we've created to give people an excuse? So kind of like you were saying, I kind of feel like if I have to say it was unconscious bias, then it's already too late. And my feeling, especially on the receiving side, would be yes, probably some damage, if you want to call it, or hurt has probably already been done. But I also think it's okay to understand that everyone's not perfect. I mean, we're talking about even all of our journeys and how different they are. So I would say creating trust where people can make mistakes, to your point about this fail, right? Because everyone doesn't get it right. But I think, you know, when I've had someone make a mistake and they say, they almost catch themselves and say that didn't feel good, I'm really sorry, I should rephrase that. And then we're suddenly in it together. Now that's my style, and we're all very different. There may be some people where that pain or that comment or whatever was done was so painful they don't know how to maybe recalibrate, and that's where I think role models come in. But I just wanted to applaud you, because my personal feeling and experience is that once you realize that something was unconscious bias, that's the first level is awareness. And then it's about creating that trust where you can have a conversation, because if the awareness is there, for me, then it's an opportunity to have a really honest, hopefully human exchange, tender exchange. And what I've found is usually that's where you win.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree with that. I think being okay with being vulnerable in that moment as well, and having the awareness to be able to ask questions from a place of wanting to understand as opposed to assume is really, really helpful. We've all got different journeys. We've all had many different experiences, and some may be really similar. You'd be surprised. Like I have conversations with senior white male leaders who are like, wow, you know, I never thought about it that way. Or actually, you know, I remember a long time ago, a leader that I was reverse mentoring at Cisco, a previous employer of mine. And I would say, you know, sometimes, and I'm not sure, you know, even as a woman, I would say something in a meeting and it would get ignored. And then 2 minutes later, you know, my male colleague might just happen to say the same thing, and it's the best thing since sliced bread. And I explained this to him, and he was like, you know, because he was from Birmingham, and he had an accent. He was like, you know, the same thing happens to me. And I thought it's because of my Brummie accent. And he was like, and it's really frustrating. So he absolutely resonated with it, because I was open and I was sharing kind of the experience I had. And I think it's about having those conversations and being vulnerable and being okay with, you know, being exposed in it, really, because you're doing it from a place of wanting to learn and understand and also empathize as well. Empathy. You know, I'm a real big advocate for empathetic leadership and just taking people on that journey of understanding, as opposed to kind of, you've done that wrong and how could you ever say that, and that's the worst thing. You know, you know, some people actually aren't even comfortable saying the word black. Because they feel like it's I can't say that, what? And then some people also say, well, I don't see colour. And I'm thinking, well, hang on a minute. If you're saying you don't see colour, that means you don't even see me. And actually, and you know, I've had that conversation. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's at least they had the openness to share that with me. So now we're on that same page as Detria's point of we're doing it together, and I can say to them, well, actually, when you don't see colour, that means you don't see me, and you should see my colour because it's a big part of me, you know. And so that's, I think I agree. Just ask the question, be vulnerable, and share your learnings with others who aren't as open.
And stretch yourself. I think all of us, when you hear these very rich, incredible backgrounds that we all come from, stretch yourself to meet different people. I mean, I tell people this basic thing, you know, if your CEO or your leaders are not radically inclusive, then good luck trying to create an authentic, inclusive, equitable environment. You know, if they don't have friends that look different, you know, if you haven't if you've only been in homogenous, and this works for us too.
Yeah.
You know, if I grew up as kind of a third culture kid, you know, I grew up in Germany and Argentina, and so I navigate culture very well. But there are many people, I've even had people on my team that have said certain things they've just never done. They'd never been with certain people of different faiths, and I was happy that I created this safe space, because the first thing to do is to stretch and to go into that. I remember, I'll be very brief here, one time there was an activity where everyone in the team hosted an event like First Fridays or something like that. This is when I was in Chicago. Don't go to my LinkedIn. I'm thinking it was so long ago, I think it's fallen off now, meaning the company I was within. But, you know, so there was the north side and the south side. And I had someone on my team say, you know, every time someone from the south side hosts the event, no one comes. And I thought, how sad. And so I then opened a discussion, and it was an honest discussion, and people were saying, oh, but I heard it wasn't safe, and there's gangs, and I was like, the Obamas live in Hyde Park. Like, and so anyway, I think creating a safe space is important, but also stretching yourself and going to be exposed to different people, and that's for all of us, right?
Abby, I come to you for some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would say just like use critical thinking skills effectively. You know, I would move away from calling it unconscious bias. I would just call it bias.
Yeah.
Because that's what it is. I think that the word unconscious just adds this extra layer, and you know, I just think I think it's kind of it's tautologist. It's a bit nonsensical. Like, it's just a bias, right? And the question is, are you going to do something about it, or are you going to allow it to fester? And so the statistics are that your most diverse group of friends and your most diverse network is when you're in primary school. And then as you get older, it will get less and less diverse. As you move through life, you will start to be in a more homogenous culture, and because you know you're in a certain income tax bracket, you start to associate with your colleagues more. You choose your friends out of convenience, not just because you're sat next to somebody at school and you don't really have a choice over who your friends are. So you have to think about, like, where am I drawing my information from? What newspapers am I reading? Do I always read The Guardian because I'm left-leaning? Maybe I should open The Times and The Telegraph and see how they portray things, because that can give me some insight into why the people who I disagree with think the way that they do. You know, when you're picking a book as somebody who is male, do you kind of skim over the female authors assuming it's for women, or do you pick those up? Like, do you avoid watching chick flicks because you think they're for girls? Do you walk past the African food shop on the high street because it looks a bit somehow and smells a bit funny, or do you challenge yourself to try some of the food? Like, you know, we live in London, there's no excuse to not opening yourself up. It's literally on your doorstep. So I think that, like, for me, it's like diversifying your life outside of your comfort zone, and also just taking everything with a pinch of salt. I think that the way that the media reports things, the way that people converse, the nuggets, the way that we like talk is like really clickbaity now. You know, we talk through tweets where it's everything is a hot take. and like you read an article and you rarely get to the end of it because you get distracted by something else popping up. So I think sometimes it's just about slowing down, thinking critically about things, wondering what the other side of discussions are, and that's a really good way of working through some of that internal conflict that we have around things, and pushing ourselves out of our comfort zones. Yeah.
Great. We have a question on Teams.
Yes, so we have a question. It's directed at Abby. So it's about your role in the police council and sitting on the board. It's just about what is the most challenging thing about being in that space?
Just like how ineffective they are organisationally. It's so frustrating. Like, I cannot believe that policing is this multi-billion pound industry, and that getting decisions made is so difficult. People move around constantly. So you'll have a conversation with someone, and this is why I'm just like, I just wish that people would write things down, because you know, like, people move around constantly, and day to day, I would say the police officers and the police staff that I interact with are honestly like fantastic. They are really challenging of the stereotypes that I had about the police, particularly because in court I would often see them as opponents and so on, and a lot of them are very, very dedicated. I think if you think of like the paradigm of a police officer, actually they're to be admired. They're people who run towards danger, right? Like, they're people who are out there to make the streets safer. They are people who are motivated by this public duty. But that also means that they have a lot of power, and it attracts people who are inherently corrupt, who want to be in those positions because they want to harm, right? So you would think that as an organisation, they would have understood that, and they would have measures in place to stop the latter from joining. They would have records of who those people are, so they can't just move to another police force. They don't. But like, some of these things are so basic. So yeah, one of the aspects that I find the most frustrating is just how obvious some of the solutions are, how everyone in the room that I'm talking to agrees that that should be the solution, and then how difficult it is to get that done. That's what I find the most frustrating. Yeah.
We have any other?
Yes, so we have another question for everyone on the panel. So it's about like different experiences that you had in your previous workplace. It's about the most impactful initiative that you've seen thrive to create an inclusive environment within your workspaces.
Who wants to go fast?
Do you want to go? Just trying to think about that.
Sure. So I won't again mention the company, but something I found to be extremely powerful somewhere that I worked was that there was essentially a committee of people assigned to me from day one to ensure that that they were committed to me essentially not leaving.
Like a personal board.
Yeah. And that they were writing me from, it was so organized, and the welcome and the embracing and the inclusion felt.
You should name this company. This company sounds
It was
amazing.
overwhelming, and I mean, right when I signed the contract, so I hadn't even joined the company yet, I was getting messages from people welcoming, sharing, you know, who was going to be there to make sure that I was successful in certain things that they said, you need to make sure you don't miss this or this, sort of giving me the back channels, because when you get into executive roles in particular, you need those. And so that's what I would say, is it was a very structured board put around me to succeed. And they said, so if you leave, it will not be because you weren't supported here. And I thought that was very powerful.
So why did you leave?
Yeah.
No, genuinely.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I was looking to have my first C-suite title, and that came sooner than I thought. And as a single, as a very successful, happy, single Black mom, you know, I couldn't turn down an extra 6 figures.
So that's one of the issues, right? If you have, yeah, fair enough.
Of course.
I just wasn't in a
I
place
don't
to do that.
I don't think you need to be a single black mum to not want to spend extra 6 figures. Like, yeah, like fair enough. But also I think that also highlights, right? If you have a company that does look after people really well, there's no attrition, so actually moving into higher positions becomes harder sometimes.
To the point where they were grooming me to be on the board of the company, tracked and ensuring that I had speaking roles for conferences. I mean, all the things that actually matter.
Now, after this panel, everybody's going to come and ask you that company. Don't tell them.
I won't.
Nobody's
Because we're
allowed
going
to
to set
talk
it up
to
here.
Detria.
Maxine, we're starting. We're doing it here.
Absolutely, we are doing that, Kearney.
One of
And it's like a personal board, isn't it? And that is very impactful. Yeah.
Well, that takes resource. Sorry. Go on. No. Well, I was just going to say, like, it also highlights there's no shortcut to this sort of thing, right? That takes resource. That was people who were invested, time that was invested, money, and so on, to create that for you. And I think that one of the issues at the moment that we have with a lot of discussions I'm having with, and you know, I'm using the police as an example, but yes, I see it mirrored everywhere. People want shortcuts that don't involve that, but there is no substitute for having someone that you can talk to, you know, people sitting down with you, FaceTime with people and so on. And I think we're losing that a lot in just the workplace, aren't we? And life in general.
Yeah, so one of the things that, another role that I actually forgot to mention, I don't know how, tired. So I sit on the board at AWS of the Black Leadership Council. It's a newly formed program. It's the Black Council, which is the Black Leadership Advancement Centre of Knowledge. And it's really...
so its alliteration is black.
It's black,
I like that.
And it's an intentional program that we have to support the black employees within our business to have that grouping, to have that process where someone comes into the organisation, they're supported, they're mentored, they're amplified, they are on that track and see themselves in that progression route. And we did that on the basis of learning about the industry and actually what other organisations are doing, because we wanted to improve. And one of the things that I've seen, and it's not at AWS, it's actually another company, is they were very intentional from the interview process to make sure you had sponsors, you had mentors, you had people included in that process, that you could go to them at any part of your career to say, look, help, this is what I'm struggling with, or this is what I need support with. And I see that's worked really well. Actually, it's in the banking industry, another employer there. So I think organisations, individuals, managers, leaders need to be intentional about setting out plans for people within their teams and really understanding what their aspirations are and working backwards from that. You know, there's no point in putting these leadership processes in place and saying to the black person, here, join that group. It might not be what they want to do. So I think being intentional but working backwards from that individual, making it a personal journey makes all the difference. That's what I wanted to add.
And I'm going to come to you, Abby.
Yeah, I think it's mirrors exactly what everybody else has said. I think the pockets of areas where I have seen really good work, it's always had the same ingredients, which is somebody who has given their time and effort to it and has remained consistent, note-taking and record-keeping so that there is legacy, and money, time and personnel being put towards it and administrative support being put towards it. And when I've seen those things come together, those are the times that I've seen initiatives work properly and being successful. And when any of those are missing, you can predict from the outset that it's not going to last.
Yeah. Do we have any more?
So I have a personal question. It's more around for everyone in the panel. It's just around like challenges that you faced in your career at large, and what strength or where did you find the strength to overcome those type of challenges? Is it more with your groups in terms of like sisterhood, or is it more with allies?
It's a good one, and I think it introduces an important part that we should discuss, which is about the sisterhood and your tribe, your network of people, and how important that is. So I'm going to go first to Detria.
So first I would say that when the challenges arise, because I have found them to be consistent, and as I mentioned, I did not come from a place of privilege. I worked for one company where it was actually the Black organization, because I thought, no one's called me, reached out to me, nothing. And they said, well, you don't understand our story. You come from this place of privilege. I thought, so I don't come from a place of privilege, meaning the way I was raised. I was the first to graduate and go to college. Had a sister who was blind that I practically raised, oldest girl of 5, became a successful single Black mom at 22, which just means, I have a strong spine, first of all, from sort of how I was raised. I thrive sort of in the gaps and with challenge, just part of my personality. But the things that are important are, for example, if we call it the sisterhood, when you have your people that are really there to say, oh, watch out, like it's really deep and rocky there, so let me give you what you need to get through that. And that can come in different forms. I mean, I've had radically inclusive white men that were absolute fire for my career. So it's about being able to have this healthy exchange about what our experience is and what we need. And I would say cleave to whoever is going to show up to give you what you need, and be open to that, even if that looks different. And then ensuring that you lean into, for me at least, it's been phenomenal, always having someone that looks like me that I can call and say, this just happened, I'm out. And the person say, no, nope, here's what we need to do. And they hug you, they catch you, they give you the emotional support because they can immediately identify with maybe emotionally some of the traumatic things that can happen in the workplace. I hope that's helpful.
Abby?
I think my biggest challenge has been myself. I get in my own way. I'm very loud and very opinionated. So like for me, the kind of consistent thing was learning when to speak and when not to, which can be really hard when like the basis of your career is advocacy as well. So it was judgment for me that was always like my biggest challenge. And for that, I would say I've had an equal measure, well, I've had at various points like different platforms of support, but even though I've kind of always grown up from about the age of 6, which is when I started going to private school, like predominantly white spaces, I always found a Black person who was like my best friend or that I was really close to. I think we just kind of do that, right? You walk into an environment, you have the nod, and you maybe don't talk to each other initially because you don't want them to all think, oh, all Black people are related, but then something happens, like you need to find out where to get some jollof, or like how do you get the plantain, or you need a tip of that hair or something, and then you bond, or someone says something and you lock eyes across the room. And yeah, so I've always, even in those environments, I think I've always found somebody who I find a source of comfort, who I can speak to, and they understand the level on which I'm relating to them. But I think something that has also helped is speaking to people who don't share my characteristics and hearing them have similar concerns, so that you don't always think it's because you are female, because you're Black. Actually, like I find it really comforting talking to people who seem to fit the bill and seem to have it all together, and you talk to them and you realise that they have similar kind of concerns, and it helps me sometimes to just kind of pitch exactly where to put the issue. And also ultimately at some point you just have to realise this may be because I'm Black and because I'm a woman, but I can't change the fact that I'm Black and I'm a woman, and so I just have to push through and just kind of get on with it. And getting those tips from your Black female peers who've done things before, your white male peers who just tell you, actually, when I was in this room, I noticed this, this, and this, so you may want to talk about that. And one of my best friends at the beginning of my career was a guy called Joseph Oppenheimer, and so just to take you through how like you apply to the bar, you apply for effectively a training contract, a pupillage, and you can do it at any stage within 2 years of when you're going to start it. So I applied for pupillage before I'd gone to bar school. So I didn't know anything about the ins and outs of advocacy and so on. But again, I was cocky, so I was like, yeah, I'll just apply for pledge, I'll apply for a scholarship, I'll see what happens. So I got these interviews, and Joe somehow was always in the slot before me. And Joe's like this like white Jewish guy who, you know, was a great talker. He'd gone to bar school. He's a little bit older than me. And Joe would sit down with me and tell me what the interview questions were for each thing, and he'd take me through, this is how you do a bail application, this is how you do a plea of mitigation for sentence, just so that you know. And then so I'd go into those interviews with that extra day of confidence, and he didn't have to do that, but that massively helped me with the interview process and things like that. So yeah, I've had some amazing champions, but they've come in all shapes and forms. But yeah, definitely consistently, it's always been a comfort to be able to find a black woman or a fellow black girl in whichever situation, because sometimes you just need that, don't you?
Creating a place too for those people that are leaders that are really leaning in and trying something different, to honor them, like you were saying about celebrating. I don't feel we create space for people to hopefully share if there's been harassment, trauma, etc. But also creating a space. You know, I've experienced, even since being at Kearney, you know, partners that were white male partners on calls and saying, excuse me, Detria, can we let Detria finish her point? And I've seen them do that with other women on their team. And finding a way to recognize those people is also really equally important, right? Because they're doing something, and sort of using that to spread across the organization, I think is important. So, sorry.
Right. Do we have any? Oh,
sorry,
yes.
she didn't get to go. Yeah, because I jumped in.
I think the question was around the challenges. I think early in my career, I suffered from listening to other people's opinions of me. And I really struggled with, well, because they're a senior leader or because they've made it and it's successful, they must be right. And actually, I'm quite transparent. I feel like it absolutely hindered me in my first formative years in corporate, because you want to kind of fit in. You know, the only person that looks like you, so you don't want to rock the boat. You want to just get on and do your work. Yeah. But when they're giving you this harsh feedback, you're too much, you're too this, you're too that. You don't fit in. You don't fit in. And, you know, it can sometimes impact on your confidence. And so those are certainly some of the challenges that I faced earlier in my career. And then as I've gotten more senior, what I've also seen is when you then get recognised for those wins, that also comes with some jealousy. It can come with that. It can come with people not understanding why you have got the limelight over them, and is it something about you that, you know, people just want to kind of amplify you, and why not them? And sometimes, you know, you have to know how to respond to that and not take it on board, because one of the things I definitely live by now is not dimming my light to make other people comfortable. Not happening.
Are you the oldest child as well?
I am the eldest child, but I don't think that actually makes. For me personally, I don't feel like that makes a difference, because I think
all three of us are the oldest children. There's something in it.
Trust me, the reason I say that.
Are you the oldest child?
No, I'm the youngest child.
Yeah, but the reason I say that, my middle sister has absolutely the same conviction I do. So I don't always think it's about being the eldest, but I do think it's about how you respond to people challenging you in your excellence, and how you stand in that. And how, you know, as women, we don't always celebrate our wins. And so when someone's putting you in that box, you kind of think, oh, let me not be arrogant. Let me not do it. Celebrate your win.
And
right?
It's okay to be competitive.
And it's okay to be competitive. And it's okay to be first. And it's okay to be a trailblazer. Celebrate that, because you're helping other people. And I live by the premise that, you know, you've got two hands. One to help yourself and one to help the person coming behind you. So if you're standing and you're doing something that's helping and it's celebrating you, enjoy that. Enjoy that moment. And then when it comes to someone else, celebrate them as well. It doesn't have to be a one-person show. So that's what I would say that's how I've overcome a challenge.
Do you guys also find, and this is something that, like, now that you are objectively successful, I think you touched upon it, like that feeling that people think you got there because you're a black woman, and you're just kind of like, are you like joking? But like, you know, like you'll get an opportunity or you'll get a recognition for something, and there's this sort of, sometimes you feel like people think the reason that you got that accolade or the reason that you are getting that spotlight, they're like, oh, well, you know, it's tokenism. It's because she is a black woman.
Yeah.
And I just think it's so, you just can't win either way. So you just have to just not listen.
I feel like you don't have to listen, but I also know that I did the work.
Yeah.
So you know
Yeah.
what? Like, I get recognised because I'm doing the work.
Yeah.
And if you don't like that, if it's uncomfortable, then ask yourself why.
Yeah.
And I just sleep well at night.
Yeah.
Let's just move on.
I mean,
We
That
could go
makes
on
me
and
laugh.
on all night,
it's
right?
like really.
But there is some amazing food waiting for us as well. So we've got to end this.
Okay.
We can continue another time. We can do this like every quarter.
Yeah.
I just want to finish off with the best advice that you've received or advice that you'd give a younger self. Because I think it's important to help the young ones, right? We've been through it. We know how not to do it. We know how to do it. But what would you tell a younger Rashada?
Ooh. Okay, and to my younger self, I would say, go where you are celebrated, not where you're tolerated.
Can you say that again, please?
Go where you are celebrated, not where you are tolerated. And find a place that's home for you.
That's a good one.
I'm
Detria?
still young, so the reason I'm challenged with this question,
I love it.
I'm challenged because I'm trying to see
I'm
how
much
far
younger
back
than you.
do you want me to go. It's interesting because my younger self, especially because I had, you know, young, single, black mom, I feel like I would walk in and I always had it all against me. I think what I would tell my younger self is if you're not being given the opportunity to provide value, to be brave enough to go somewhere else. So now that bravery is absolutely there. And I would encourage everyone to always know your worth in the market. It's very important to create space to do that. But I think I was overcome by fear, my younger self. So I would tell my younger self, if you're not of value, that's okay. Because we know that we're good at what we do. So having that confidence to leave and go where you can be of value, because that's what's really going to be fire for your career.
Abby, you know this is coming to you.
Yeah. I would say I would tell her to have more fun. Like, I have no scandalous stories from when I was younger. No, but you know what? It makes me kind of sad looking back at it. Like, my friends that went to Oxford went to these like massive like ravey parties, and I was like the good Christian girl. I didn't do that. Like, I didn't date around as much as I could have. Like, no, I'm for real. Like, I would actually say, I think that there's this kind of thing that we don't talk about in the black community. How like the eldest daughter, especially when you're Nigerian and so on, like you're giving this example. You feel a lot of pressure to be good,
Yeah.
like all the
Yes.
time. And I was such a good girl, and now like I'm so jealous when my husband tells me his stories about the things that he got up to, the women that he was with, and I'm just like, I didn't do any of that. And you know, there are people at the bar who had a lot of fun and it hasn't affected their careers, and I just think, oh, I could have done that. Like, so yeah,
So it's
I
like,
would
don't
tell
take
her to have
yourself
more
too
fun.
seriously.
Yeah, but like just have some more fun. Like, enjoy it. Travel a bit more. You know, kiss that guy. You know,
We're getting a theme here. Right. And I would add to that, and I would say, you know, use your difference, because everybody is different in a different way.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody here has a difference. Could be along very many labels, whichever it is. Use your difference to make a difference, and don't let your difference or believe that your difference is limiting. That's not a limitation. That's a limiting belief that you've got, and it's only you that can shut that up. So use your difference and celebrate it. And we celebrate you women today. We celebrate all women in the room today. We salute you, sisters.
But we
You've
celebrate you.
Yes,
We
thank you.
celebrate you. We celebrate you.
So thank you so much, Trailblazers. And thank you for sharing your triumphs, your trials, your challenges, your joys, what you should have done, but didn't do. You've made us better people, just hearing you today. And ended us on a high, really, because we know what it is that we should do and watch out for. We're a little bit more knowledgeable having spent this time with you. Thank you for sharing your time with us. You're incredibly busy. They are busy women, right? And they've come here today, spent more than an hour. Consultants don't even do 30 minutes. And you've been here much longer, and we say thank you. Amazing, and continue doing what it is that you do, because it is very impactful, and we see you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you.